If you've never stood barefoot on your own patio, watching a woman you barely know weld a locked iron gate across your private pool entrance while quoting HOA bylaws that don't exist, then you've never met Karen. It happened on a bright Saturday morning, the kind of day meant for sunbathing and sprinkler fun, not confronting suburban tyranny in a wide-brimmed visor and khakis. I came out with my coffee, blinked twice at the half-built monstrosity on my property, and asked the only question a sane person could ask in that moment. "Karen, what in the chlorinated hell are you doing?" She turned slowly, as if she'd rehearsed the moment in a mirror, and replied, "I'm protecting the community. You'll thank me later." That's when my golden retriever Captain Bubbles, who was floating on a pool raft just moments earlier, jumped out of the water, barked like we were being robbed, and tried to chase off the welder. But Karen had already installed a keypad and laminated, "Pool access by HOA approval only" signs on both sides of the gate. That was the exact moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with a nosy neighbor. I was under siege. 2 days earlier, everything had been normal. Our backyard pool was our little slice of heaven, something my wife and I had worked hard to build after years of saving. It was the one place our kids could unwind after school, and honestly, it was Captain Bubbles' favorite hangout spot. He'd float in circles wearing his yellow ducky vest, tongue hanging out, tail splashing the water behind him like a propeller. But Karen had recently been promoted, or more accurately, self-promoted, to vice president of the HOA. No one voted for her. The previous VP, Mr. Reynolds, had moved to Florida, and Karen just took the title like she was claiming a parking spot. And with that invisible crown came her version of martial law. First, she tried to regulate unauthorized lawn furniture. Then came the curfew notices for backyard lights. But the gate? That was her grand finale. The gate was professionally welded by a local contractor she somehow convinced she had the legal right to hire on behalf of the neighborhood. It wasn't just a decorative thing. It was a full wrought iron barrier complete with a numeric keypad, motion-activated lights, and a small speaker that beeped anytime someone approached. It looked like it belonged in front of a celebrity mansion, not some middle-class suburban pool. I stared at it in stunned silence while Karen rattled off nonsense about shared property lines and community amenity protocols. I wasn't even angry yet. I was too busy trying to process the absurdity. When I told her the pool was fully on my land and installed without HOA funds or input, she nodded like I was the one who didn't get it. "Yes," she said slowly, "but it visually represents a communal benefit. That's part of the bylaws now. Page 23. I can print you a copy." I asked her if she wrote page 23 herself. She didn't even blink. "Someone had to fill the gap," she said, which, for the record, is exactly how most dictatorships start. My wife called the city. The city sent an inspector. The inspector stood in front of the gate, shook his head like he couldn't believe this was his life now, and said, "Sir, did you know this gate is registered as municipal safety infrastructure?" I nearly choked on my coffee. Apparently, Karen had submitted blueprints to the city claiming our pool was a community access resource that required restricted entry to comply with federal safety standard. She even forged a few signatures from other neighbors, including one guy who'd been in Mexico for 6 months. I couldn't tell whether to laugh or scream. I demanded she remove it. She refused. I called a lawyer. He said we needed to go through a process and submit formal complaints to both the HOA board and the city, which could take weeks. Meanwhile, Karen was out there every day with a clipboard, telling random people they could reserve pool slots and to email her for code. I watched her from my kitchen window, mouth open, as she led a young couple with inflatable flamingos up to the gate like a concierge at a hotel spa. My own family couldn't even get in unless she decided we were in compliance. The kids were furious. My son tried to climb the gate and scraped his knee. My daughter, who had planned her birthday pool party for that weekend, asked if we were being punished. Even Captain Bubbles was confused. He'd walk up to the gate, bark, and stare at it like he expected it to open if he wagged hard enough. That night, after we turned off the porch lights and the kids went to bed, I sat out by the poolside patio with a flashlight, a notebook, and a heavy dose of rage. That's when the idea hit me. I looked over at Captain Bubbles, who was sprawled out beside his empty water bowl, and remembered how he used to bark every time the Amazon guy showed up. How he knew which squirrels were regulars and which were intruders. How he could shake and roll over, and even open the fridge door with his paw. And suddenly, I knew exactly what to do. If Karen wanted a gate, fine. Let her have it. But I was about to make sure that every time she, or anyone else, came near it, they'd be met with a security system more loyal, more adorable, and more effective than anything she could build. Captain Bubbles was about to become the first ever pool security dog, complete with training, tech, and a wardrobe that would make a lifeguard jealous. I ordered the vest that night. The orange one, with the waterproof whistle. If Karen wanted a war, she just declared it. And my dog? He was ready for battle. The next morning, while Karen strutted past the gate with her clipboard and smug expression like she was preparing to christen a yacht, I was inside my garage laying out training cones, dog treats, a Bluetooth-enabled security camera, and the bright orange life vest that had just arrived via overnight shipping. Captain Bubbles wagged his tail excitedly as I held up the vest and announced, "You, my friend, are about to become the most adorable nightmare she's ever encountered." I strapped the vest onto him, tightened the buckles, and watched as he did a proud little strut across the floor like he already knew he'd been promoted to head of security. His tail wagged so furiously, it nearly knocked over my coffee mug. I started simple, basic commands: sit, stay, bark, alert. Each time he followed through near the gate, he got a treat. Within the hour, he had figured out that anyone approaching the gate meant a chance to bark and earn a reward. But I didn't stop there. I added a wireless smart button to the inside corner post of the pool fence, strategically placed where Captain Bubbles could boop it with his nose. That button triggered our backyard sprinkler system. It was usually programmed for Sunday mornings, but with some rewiring and a smart plug, I made it manual. So now, if Karen, or any uninvited guest, came near the gate, Captain Bubbles would sound the alarm and give them a surprise soaking. I tested it twice. It worked like magic. Meanwhile, Karen had turned my pool into her own neighborhood talking point. She sent out emails about her bold move toward community safety, and even hosted a short Facebook Live segment titled, "How to Lead Without Fear. HOA Leadership in Action." She recorded herself standing in front of the locked gate, gesturing toward the keypad like she was unveiling a new tech product. Captain Bubbles barked continuously in the background, which she called an unfortunate auditory distraction. Little did she know that dog was weeks ahead of her in tactical planning. By Wednesday, the entire neighborhood had taken side. Half the residents thought Karen had lost her mind and were furious about her gate antics. The other half, mostly her friends and the people who never used the pool anyway, supported her leadership and safety-first vision. I was stuck in the middle of a suburban Cold War, armed with a dog in a vest and a growing collection of surveillance footage. That night, I mounted the new GoPro harness onto Captain Bubbles. He looked like a puppy version of a Navy SEAL. We tested it out by recording his patrol loop around the backyard. The footage was gold. Especially when he paused to sniff the flower pots and then dashed back to the gate the second he heard a noise. I uploaded a short clip to a neighborhood community group with a sarcastic caption, "Security upgrade complete. Unauthorized cannonballs will be met with wagging resistance." The post blew up overnight. Comments flooded in. Some people laughed and called him Sergeant Splashes. Others accused me of mocking a serious safety situation. One woman wrote, "That dog has more sense than the entire HOA." Karen, of course, responded under a fake account and accused me of encouraging pet aggression. Ironically, the only aggression Captain Bubbles ever displayed was licking strangers' faces and trying to cuddle their shoes. Friday afternoon brought the first real showdown. Karen returned with a couple I'd never seen before, mid-30s, both in beachwear, dragging an inflatable flamingo and a soft-sided cooler. They walked straight up to the gate while Karen punched in the keypad like she was swiping into the Pentagon. She smiled back at them and said, "As promised, pool access." That's when Captain Bubbles made his entrance. He stood just inside the gate, puffed up in his vest like a furry lifeguard on duty, then barked 3 times and slapped the sprinkler button with his paw. The sprinklers roared to life, blasting the intruders with a stream of icy water. The flamingo spun into the mud. The woman shrieked. The man dropped the cooler. Karen screamed, "That dog is a menace." I watched the whole thing from the upstairs window, grinning so hard my cheeks hurt. Later that evening, I checked the GoPro footage. Perfect angle. Everything recorded. I edited the clip, added dramatic music, and reposted it online. Within hours, someone had added captions. "When you guard the pool harder than the HOA president guards her ego." The video went viral in the local community and started gaining traction on pet forums and HOA complaint subreddit. Karen became the unwilling star of 100 GIF. The next day, I found laminated signs on the outside of my fence. "Attention! Pet must be leashed and silent in shared spaces. HOA Ordinance 14B. I tore them down. Karen showed up 10 minutes later with her phone, recording my removal of official safety signage. I ignored her. Captain Bubbles trotted over and barked once. She backed up like he was going to launch himself over the gate. I decided to take things one step further. I printed a wooden sign and nailed it to the poolside. Protected by canine patrol. Entry requires belly rubs and legal authorization. I painted paw prints along the edges. It was both adorable and effective. Every neighbor who saw it cracked a smile. Except Karen, who called the HOA emergency line and reported me for weaponizing humor against the board. That weekend, things escalated. Karen returned again, this time with 2 more people. I recognized one of them. Another HOA board member who had seemed neutral up until now. They stood at the gate, spoke in hushed tones, and pointed at the cameras I'd installed. Then Karen said something that made me drop my lemonade. "We'll just install a second keypad on the inside. They can't stop us." My wife overheard too. She whispered, "She's doubling down. She thinks she's winning." But Karen didn't know I had already hired a private investigator. Or that the city inspector had returned quietly earlier that week, this time noting down measurements, photos, and sketches of the gate. She didn't know that we were gathering evidence of trespassing, illegal property modification, and impersonation of HOA authority. Most importantly, she didn't know Captain Bubbles was now triggering cloud uploads every time he activated the sprinkler system. Every bark was a backup. The gate may have been locked, but the battle was wide open. And my pool wasn't the only thing getting ready to boil. Karen had made it clear she wasn't backing down, but what she didn't realize was that neither was I. While she paraded around the neighborhood waving her fake pool authority like it was a royal scepter, I was quietly shifting the tide of battle. The moment she mentioned installing a second keypad on the inside of the gate, something clicked in me. This wasn't about safety or order, it was about control. She wanted to dominate this street the same way she'd tried to dominate every conversation at the monthly HOA meetings, always with that sugary condescension and faux concern. But this time, she wasn't up against mild-mannered retirees or apathetic homeowners. She was up against someone who knew how to play the long game, and someone who had just hired a former HOA investigator who specialized in shady suburban power move. His name was David Rowles. He used to live in a gated community 3 towns over and spent years exposing HOA fraud until he finally turned it into a business. He didn't wear a trench coat or fedora, more like a windbreaker and Bluetooth headset, but he knew every dirty trick in the HOA handbook. I gave him a rundown of the situation, forwarded him the documents Karen had submitted to the city, and handed over every bit of footage Captain Bubbles' GoPro had captured so far. He was impressed by the dog, mildly horrified by the gate, and genuinely curious about how someone with no legal claim had convinced a city official to log my private pool as public infrastructure. David started digging that day. Meanwhile, I kept feeding the online fire. The viral sprinkler video had spawned a subreddit thread titled, "HOA Karen Gets Hosed," and someone had started selling Captain Bubbles security t-shirts online. I bought 3. Karen, of course, was furious about the attention. She posted a public rant on the HOA website claiming she was being digitally harassed by an anonymous cyber mob, led by a reckless pet owner who weaponized animals for fame. She attached a blurry photo of Captain Bubbles, looking extremely proud in his vest, and labeled him a public nuisance. The community didn't exactly rally to her side. Still, Karen doubled down. She hosted a so-called emergency HOA safety assembly in her front yard, complete with folding chairs, printouts of pool accident statistics, and lemon water. Only 6 people showed up. 4 of them left after realizing it was just a power trip disguised as a meeting. The other 2 were her cousins from out of town. She tried to livestream it, but one of the neighbor kids photobombed her with a Captain Bubbles shirt and a pool noodle sword. The video tanked. Her frustration started to show, especially when the inspector showed up unannounced again. This time with a clipboard, a tape measure, and a camera crew from the local zoning office. I watched from behind my blinds as the inspector walked the perimeter of the gate and made note. Karen came out full steam, shouting about prior approvals and emergency measures, but the inspector calmly asked for her permits. She stalled, claimed they were in her car, then suddenly remembered she had to run an errand, and disappeared into her house. The inspector shook his head, spoke to one of his crew, and they continued documenting the gate, the keypad, and the laminate signs Karen had posted. Later, I learned they'd found the wiring to the keypad was not only non-compliant, it was dangerous. Exposed wire ends, poor insulation, and worst of all, it was hooked into a breaker that powered both our yard lights and a side-room freezer where we kept our backup meat and emergency supplies. She had tapped into our power grid without permission. David called me later that night with even bigger news. He'd discovered that Karen had tried this before, in 2 different states. In both places, she had used her temporary HOA roles to assert control over community spaces and even private property, labeling them as shared enhancements or emergency reallocations. One neighborhood sued her. Another offered her a cash settlement to leave. In both cases, she moved shortly afterward. It was a pattern, and David had the proof. We bundled the findings together with the city's safety report, footage from Captain Bubbles' camera, and emails Karen had sent to neighbors claiming authority she didn't legally possess. I forwarded it all to our HOA board and to my attorney. The board, to their credit, responded quickly. A few of them had already started to worry about Karen's antics affecting property values. One of them, Mr. Gordon, dropped by that weekend with a folder of apology letters from board members who said they hadn't known the full scope of what she was doing. He shook my hand, told me the next HOA meeting would address the situation directly, and said I might want to bring Captain Bubbles as a guest of honor. But Karen wasn't finished. 2 days later, I heard a commotion by the gate. I went outside to find Karen on her phone, pacing angrily in front of the keypad. Her friends from the assembly were standing awkwardly behind her, towels slung over their shoulders, clearly expecting to swim. Karen barked into the phone, saying something about interference with official HOA installations and uncooperative homeowners. Then Captain Bubbles emerged from behind the deck chairs. He was already wearing his vest. He trotted right up to the gate, stared directly at Karen, and hit the sprinkler button with a single, decisive boop. The scream that followed echoed across the block. That evening, I received a notice from the city. The gate was to be removed within 10 business days, or Karen would face penalties for unauthorized installation, code violations, and property encroachment. A follow-up letter from the HOA board outlined an emergency vote regarding her status as vice president. The documents were poetic justice in print. Captain Bubbles, of course, didn't understand any of it. But he did understand the new treat I gave him, a bone shaped like a lifeguard whistle. He chewed it happily on the pool steps while the last rays of sunlight danced across the water. Karen had drawn the battle lines, but we were winning. One bark, one sprinkler blast, and one absurd GoPro clip at a time. Karen may have been battered by the inspector's report and the HOA's shifting tides, but she wasn't the kind of person to go down quietly. Just when I thought we were entering the final stretch of reclaiming our pool, she did what every unhinged suburban tyrant does when cornered. She staged a spectacle. A flyer appeared on every porch by sunrise Saturday morning, printed in full color and tucked into laminated sleeves, no doubt to survive the sprinklers she was now terrified of. The title read, "Community Pool Day, Reclaim What's Ours." Below that, a bullet-point list of activities. Snacks, inflatables, lifeguard on duty, her nephew, who was 15, and community unity in the face of intimidation. I nearly choked on my cereal. She even included a line that read, "Keypad access provided for registered attendees. Dress code, family-friendly." My wife was livid. Is this some sort of rebellion? She's throwing a protest at our pool? It was worse than that. Karen was trying to manufacture legitimacy. If enough people showed up and used the pool, she could spin it as de facto community usage. It was the HOA version of squatters' rights. But what Karen hadn't considered was that I'd already prepared for escalation. The investigator had briefed me on what to do if she pulled something exactly like this. The city had issued a temporary injunction against unauthorized entry. And most importantly, I had the sheriff's office on speed dial, with the case file and documentation already flagged. I spent that morning prepping the yard like we were expecting a siege. Captain Bubbles got a fresh brushing and his most commanding orange life vest. I swapped his GoPro battery and gave him a new wireless button, this time programmed to activate not just the sprinklers, but the loudspeaker mounted on the fence post. When triggered, it would play a pre-recorded message in a cheerful but firm voice. Private property alert. This pool is not open to the public. Please step away from the gate. It was designed to be just annoying enough to send nosy people packing, but legal enough to avoid any claims of harassment. By 2 p.m., the event had started. Karen arrived first, of course, in a matching sun hat and beach wrap combo, dragging a wagon full of pool noodles and store-brand lemonade. Her face was already flushed, either from the heat or the fury brewing inside her. Behind her came a slow trickle of guests, most of them confused, unsure whether this was some real HOA-endorsed gathering or a rogue rally. Karen greeted them like a cruise director, smiling brightly and pointing toward the gate with flair. That was when she realized there was a fresh lock on the inside. The keypad didn't work anymore. She marched to the gate, punched in her code with theatrical flair, and nothing happened. She tried again. Still nothing. Then she rattled the gate and shouted toward the house. I didn't respond. Captain Bubbles did. He let out a perfectly timed bark, strolled over to the gate, and sat in full view of the gathering crowd, head held high like a little canine general. Then, he slapped the sprinkler button. A fine mist sprayed over Karen and the front row of attendees, eliciting shrieks and sudden backpedaling. I heard one guy mutter, "Is this part of the event?" before retreating behind his cooler. A few brave souls lingered, mostly neighbors who had shown up out of curiosity or boredom. Karen tried to regroup. She grabbed her phone and started live-streaming again. "This is the injustice we're facing," she declared to her handful of viewers. Private citizens weaponizing water, preventing access to what's been historically enjoyed by the community. Captain Bubbles walked back into frame, tail wagging. Karen glared at him like he was personally responsible for her social downfall. Then the loudspeaker kicked in. Private property alert. This pool is not open to the public. The crowd started laughing. Karen's stream abruptly ended. Then came the real showstopper. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up in front of the house. 2 uniformed deputies stepped out, calm and casual. Karen rushed toward them like they were her reinforcements, pointing wildly toward our yard. "He's violating neighborhood rights." He turned his dog into a weapon. One of the officers raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, we're here on behalf of the homeowner. We have a formal complaint filed against you. Trespassing, vandalism, and unauthorized modification of private property." The silence that followed was deafening. People who'd been milling around started picking up their towels. One woman turned to her husband and whispered, "We shouldn't be here." Karen tried to backpedal, saying she was acting on behalf of the HOA. But the deputy had a folder in hand, with all the documentation. He even quoted the municipal code. "Your actions were unauthorized, and the city has ruled that this property, including the pool and surrounding fence, is privately owned. You have no jurisdiction here." Karen stammered, eyes darting around the yard as her credibility evaporated. One of her so-called guests began filming the encounter. Another neighbor muttered, "This is gonna be on Facebook before dinner." Captain Bubbles barked twice, which I decided to interpret as applause. The sheriff instructed Karen to vacate the property immediately and informed her she would be contacted regarding further action. She stood there, stunned, as if someone had just unplugged her from her own fantasy. Then she stormed off, dragging the wagon behind her, pool noodles trailing behind like a defeated parade float. By the end of the hour, every single guest had left. The folding chairs were abandoned on the sidewalk. The lemonade sat untouched, heating under the sun. Karen's flyers flapped in the breeze like the last echoes of a failed regime. I walked outside, gave a polite nod to the deputies, and knelt beside Captain Bubbles. He licked my cheek and wagged his tail as if to say, "Told you I had this." That evening, the HOA board sent out an official statement. Karen had been suspended pending a full review. An emergency vote would be held the following week, and all actions taken by her on behalf of the HOA regarding my pool were to be considered null and void. I printed the notice and framed it right next to the back door. But the real reward came later, as I stood on the deck, watching the sunset reflect off the water. My kids splashed in the deep end, my wife sipped a drink in the lounger, and Captain Bubbles stood proudly on his platform, soaking in the praise like a celebrity lifeguard. The battle for the pool wasn't just a petty suburban squabble anymore. It had become a symbol of pushing back against entitlement and control. And the best part? We still had one last chapter to write. Because Karen may have lost her crowd and her power, but she hadn't yet faced the full judgment of the community she tried to rule. And justice, as they say, is best served poolside. The HOA board meeting that would decide Karen's fate was scheduled for the following Thursday evening, and you could feel the tension building across the neighborhood like static before a storm. Word had spread fast about the failed community pool day, the sheriff's arrival, and the dramatic sprinkler ambush that had turned Karen into an online sensation for all the wrong reasons. Her live streams had dried up, the flyers stopped appearing, and the clipboard had vanished from sight. She still walked the neighborhood, but with noticeably shorter strides and less eye contact. The gate remained in place but untouched, a monument to a failed power grab. And in the meantime, Captain Bubbles had reached something close to local celebrity status. He was recognized at the vet, requested for neighborhood birthday parties, and someone even spray-painted a mural of him wearing his life vest on the side of the dog park entrance. As Thursday approached, my inbox flooded with messages from neighbors who planned to attend the meeting. Some offered to testify, others just wanted to see the fireworks. My lawyer provided a final folder of evidence, printouts of Karen's forged documents, city violation reports, and video stills of her on my property giving unauthorized tours of the pool area. The HOA board, to their credit, was taking it seriously. They rented out the local community center auditorium and set up a projector. The room filled up quickly on the night of the meeting. Chairs ran out, people stood along the walls, and a few teenagers had even brought popcorn like it was a Friday movie screening. Karen arrived fashionably late, probably hoping to make some sort of grand entrance. She wore a stiff blazer, heels, and a pin that said "Community First." Her smile was forced, eyes darting nervously toward the board members seated at the front. When her name was called, she stepped up to the microphone and launched into what had clearly been a prepared speech. She talked about vision, civic duty, and the burdens of leadership. She framed everything as a misunderstanding, blamed the gate on contractor miscommunication, and tried to paint herself as a protector wronged by bureaucracy. For a moment there was silence. Then the HOA president, Mrs. Lopez, calmly thanked her and invited me to speak next. I didn't waste time. I let the evidence speak for itself. The projector lit up with a slide that read "Unauthorized Access and HOA Overreach Case Study. Karen." I walked through each item like a prosecutor laying out a case. Footage of Karen explaining the community gate to strangers. Screenshots of her emails demanding access code compliance. The sprinkler video, which drew laughter and a few scattered claps. And finally, the city notice ordering the gate's removal, along with her forged signatures. The mood in the room shifted palpably. You could see people's faces harden. The board whispered among themselves. Then I closed with the final clip, Karen telling the HOA assembly that soon, they'll move out and this will just be mine. That quote hung in the air like a bad smell. When I finished, the floor opened to public comment. That's when it really unraveled. One by one, neighbors stood to speak. Mrs. Callahan from 2 doors down, who Karen once yelled at for painting her mailbox. Mr. Singh, who Karen tried to fine for having a bird feeder. A teen who said Karen called him a public safety hazard for skateboarding too close to her hydrangeas. Story after story poured out, each one stacking up like bricks in a wall that trapped Karen in her own mess. When someone mentioned how well Captain Bubbles had handled the situation, the room erupted in applause. Karen sat frozen, hands clasped in her lap, staring at the floor. The vote wasn't even close. By unanimous decision, Karen was suspended indefinitely from the HOA board, pending a full ethics review. She was ordered to reimburse the HOA for any false filings and legal costs related to the gate. And the kicker, she was personally responsible for its removal. She could either take it down within 5 business days or pay the city's fee to have it dismantled. She left the meeting in silence, her shoes clacking hollowly against the linoleum as she made her way out past rows of people who had finally seen her for what she was. For the first time, Karen didn't have a clipboard to hide behind. A week later, the gate was gone. A contractor showed up early one morning, cut the welds, and loaded the pieces onto a flatbed truck. Karen watched from her porch but didn't say a word. A few neighbors came by to see it happen, and someone brought donut. It felt like the closing scene of a movie. My fence was restored, the keypad wiring ripped out, and my pool was finally back to being just ours. To celebrate, we hosted a proper party the next weekend. No flyers. No forced rules. Just family, friends, burgers on the grill, and music in the air. And in the center of it all was Captain Bubbles, lounging on his float with his tongue out and his tail lazily wagging in the water. We gave him a ceremony that day. A mini lifeguard plaque with his name on it, a waterproof dog cake with frosting shaped like sunglasses, and a new vest embroidered with the words "Defender of the Deep." The kids cheered as he barked proudly. Even Mrs. Lopez showed up, handed me a formal HOA apology letter, and asked if we'd consider hosting next month's board social in our yard. I told her we'd think about it, as long as Karen wasn't bringing the lemonade. The following Monday, Karen put her house up for sale. No farewell note. No apologies. Just a cold listing on the HOA bulletin board and a "for sale" sign on the lawn by noon. By the end of the month, the moving trucks rolled up. Captain Bubbles sat by the fence, watching with mild interest as boxes were hauled out and furniture was loaded. When the last van pulled away and the sun hit just right, he lifted one paw in the air, as if giving a final wave. We stood there watching too. My wife slipped her arm around me, and the kids threw a beach ball back and forth across the pool. I couldn't help but feel a strange peace settle over everything. Not because Karen was gone, but because we had taken back what was ours without losing who we were. We didn't stoop to her level. We didn't rage or break things. We fought with facts, community, and a golden retriever in a life vest. And in the end, that was more than enough.